Welcome to the Five Phenomenon Podcast. I am your host, Shane Hayes, and coming up on today's episode, part 2 of our interview with Tim Lucas, film historian and film critic. I was joined with guest co-host Ted Haycraft again for this episode. But first up, hope you guys are doing well. I've been pretty consistent with my lockdown, which means I've been watching way too much stuff, which usually in times of uncertainty, like, that's a tendency. I mean, I just hunker down and it exacerbates all my introvert sensibility, I guess. And so just watching a movie at home was whatever. It's also one of my reasons to continue to embrace physical media, especially if we get in a situation like Europe's in, where the broadband's going to have to be diminished. So, I mean, I watched a ton of stuff this week. I have one of the things I typically watch when I do that is kind of, it's like, it's not a tier of your favorite movies or even your second tier favorite movies. It's somewhere down that way where it's like a movie you liked quite a bit, but you haven't seen in like 5 years, so, or maybe more, so you can rediscover it again. So first up on that was I watched Parallax View. It's on HBO Go right now, and I don't know if any of you got the Clute Blu-ray that Criterion put on, but Pakula and Gordon Willis, when they work together, just, my God, Gordon Willis, just his ability to stage these amazing scenes in single shots in a very odd angle, like, is just kind of breathless to watch. And the other thing I noted when watching it was there's this really amazing montage in the middle, kind of a like a Clockwork Orange film that Warren Beatty's forced to watch to indoctrinate him, and it's really well edited. But if you've seen it, it's hard to find. One of Gordon Willis's first movies, it's technically his second, I think. It's called End of the Road. Is really interesting movies. I won't say it's like wall to wall a great movie, but like the first 2-3 minutes of it are just some amazing filmmaking. And this seems like a polished version of it, kind of, even though that was a scene, and this is just kind of like a more of a film essay, which, I mean, to be fair, Willis probably didn't actually, film most of the stills that they did. It's an editing technique, but there's still seem to be some overlap too. I watched On Her Majesty's Secret Service in light of the lack of the Bond movie that I was cautiously optimistic about, which we'll wait till Thanksgiving, which is also a huge favorite of the co-host of today's episode, Ted Haycraft. And Ted, if you're listening, I'm sorry to say it wasn't a good rewatch. At first I was into it. I know your love of Lazenby. Part of me is worried that I'm just doing the unloved movie defender thing, and part of it was Lazenby's his delivery of the catchphrase is he was the first non-Connery guy to have to do it, and maybe that just brought out some of those lines are pretty bad. It's interesting because it's directed by Peter Hunt, who was a Bond editor up until that point, and he got into the seat, and so it's a really well-made movie too. But there's also a lot of forced editorial trickery in the movie. But what else did I watch this week? Last night, Carlito's Way. That's back into the initial category I was talking about with the one you haven't seen in a while. Like, Carlito's Way is also one of those movies that whenever I complain about the groupthink of critics, what ends up happening, or at least used to, maybe the internet changed it a little, was that there was these arbitrary gang up with the groupthink on certain movies. And there's this like really lazy narrative, usually at the time, that like, I mean, I guess Carlito's Way isn't as well respected just because it's De Palma working with Al Pacino, and Pacino doing a Puerto Rican accent, so maybe it's similar to Scarface, I guess. But I like Scarface. They're different movies, obviously, but Carlito's Way is just one of De Palma's best achievements and a career of a lot of great achievements. Just the last like 20 minutes, 30 minutes of that movie, like if you know the movie, basically the last chase of the movie, like man, if you've seen the De Palma documentary, supposedly he said that when he was at a film festival watching the movie, he just flat out said to himself, "I don't know if I can make a better movie than this," and it's kind of true, even though I think he followed it up with Mission Impossible, so there's a lot of good set pieces in that too. But just the end is just palpitating. But so hopefully you guys are watching some interesting stuff and staying alive. It's just, I mean, honestly, we're all in this position of just unprecedented feelings and letting our minds wander. But the movies are just, I mean, everything. I think last week I admit at the time there's still like 2 or 3 movies still in production, and everything now is shut down. Like I had 2 interesting phone calls this week from colleagues. One, basically, he had a job set up. He was working on a documentary, and it's pushed because they can't film people in person for a while. So I mean, maybe. And then the second person I talked to is the more hopeful spot of literally she was working on a movie that finished right under the line. It just just finished its shoot. It wasn't like Paul Schrader's movie had to stop 5 days of shoot, and he had this crazy message to his producers. But after it, but so my friend's movie finished shooting, and they're doing remote editing. But the movie's also going to have some kind of intense VFX on it, and no idea how that's going to happen. You gotta imagine that could be done work from home, but maybe not. I mean, but you got to imagine also that budgets are going to have to expand some way to like accommodate this, and that doesn't make working in the film industry all that desirable right now, I guess. Like I saw Ted Sarandos say something that I think it was Ted Sarandos was talking about Netflix's output and how it's not going to affect anything now, but all these things that should be shooting now are, it's going to be what stuff that's going to come out at the end of the year. It's not going to be there for. And I mean, I know the priority obviously is, the health versus the economic thing. That's been something I've been weighing against. Where like, is the damage of the virus going to be more economic, or is it health, or is it a thing where obviously we just need to hunker down, get the hospitals in good shape right now, and then worry about the economy? But I mean, or can we walk and chew gum at the same time? But as for just future work, I don't know what's going on. So, well, anyway, that's enough with me. On to part 2 of our interview with Tim Lucas. Tim, I wanted to mention when I first proposed to Ted that getting you on the podcast, the first thing he said was, well, we can do an entire podcast just on the Mario Bava book alone.
I brought my book with to show Shane. Got it out of the box. I should be ashamed. I never sent my postcard in. The postcard's still in the box.
Oh, well.
So, I guess it's never too late.
You'd have to put extra postage on it now.
That's true. But yeah, so the Mario Bava, I think we should hear a little bit about some of it, because the whole evolution of how did what sparked that spark. I remember just thinking at the time, I think when I discovered you, you became instantly one of my favorite writers on film. So I don't think I had no clue on Bava, maybe other than maybe a couple of titles like, oh, that guy, or that movie or something. And then so I just blindly sent the money in when you first solicited for the book, just thinking, I just want to read, I just want to see what Tim has to say about this guy, but not knowing anything about him. And and all of a sudden I find out Martin Scorsese's a fan of him, and then of course this book. I don't know if there's a bigger book, more lavish and more whatever.
It does seem
film
to
director.
have initiated this trend of huge books. I mean, since the Bava book came out, there's been Stephen Thrower's Nightmare USA.
Oh yeah, the Fab Press
Now
stuff. Yeah.
there's a huge book coming out now on Andy Milligan
Yeah.
by from Fab Press, working in tandem with Nicholas Winding Refn. It's Jimmy McDonough. It's his new edition of his book on Andy Milligan, and I've heard that it's £15.
Well, I tell you what, Tim, it was your articles on Andy that, I mean, I'm thinking, I don't know if I really want to sit down and watch the films, but I love you writing about them. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. The funny thing is that I had a funny feeling about Andy Milligan, and there were various directors that I wanted to sort of commit myself to see what they were trying to say. And I remember I did an article on Ed Wood so that I could force myself to sort of go through all of his work and write about it. And it was my least favorite self-imposed assignment of anything I did for the magazine. I really didn't get a good feeling about the work in the end. I mean, it's competent in places, it's very personal in places, but it didn't speak to me in any interesting way. But when I sat down with Milligan, his work has like no directorial style, really. It's completely reckless, but there is a very consistent personal message about, what it is to be, an artist who is a complete outcast in his own world and who hates everybody that he sees. And, it's like one character in one of the movies says, "You're just one big hate." And the Andy Milligan films are pretty much one big hate, and they're hilarious and they're campy, and they actually do have a pretty strong connection to like the Todd Slaughter films from the 1930s and 40s in England, what they called strong meat pictures, which were very theatrical, grand guignol sort of thing. But I think Milligan's really interesting. And when I got to the last movie that I had of his, which was Monstrosity, it ended with the scene that's taking place. You hear someone yell, "Cut," and then the camera pulls back slowly, and you see all of the realities of filmmaking taking place around this core scene on the street somewhere in Los Angeles. And I thought, well, this proves that, he was an artist. He had a real sense of, he wanted to share that experience, his experience as a filmmaker with his audience. Bava did the same thing at the end of Black Sabbath, the European version of Black Sabbath, pulling away from a screen illusion and to show the various machinations of the crew members to bring that scene to life.
These would have been before Day for Night.
Yeah, well, Milligan would have been after, and Bava would have been before.
So on the Bava book, so when did you realize this thing was becoming a much bigger thing than you had maybe originally thought it was?
Well, I never really had a sense of the proportion of the book. I mean, I'll tell you, I started out originally, it was going to be an article in Cinefantastique, a career article, one of their retrospectives. But I didn't write that because my relationship with Cinefantastique deteriorated over the way they edited some of my material. And so it sort of became a book project around that time. And I was keeping material, and I was getting Xeroxes of tear sheets from other publications. People would send me things, and I was collecting tapes. And it got to be, the time to actually decide whether I was going to do it or not. Because there were times after that when I thought, well, maybe I won't write the book. Maybe I will write the book. And so when I really started to address myself to it, it couldn't have happened at a worse time because Video Watchdog was going monthly, which meant that the only work I could do on the book had to be between issues of a monthly magazine. And it ended up taking me 7 years of actually writing the manuscript nonstop between issues. So it was just a killing, punishing schedule. And then once I finished, Donna took 4 years to create the layout between monthly issues of Video Watchdog. I think we eventually went back to a bi-monthly schedule during that period, just to give her additional time to work on the layout. And all throughout those latter stages, there were people on the internet that were saying, they're going to screw you. You should really file a complaint with the Better Business Bureau. These people are taking your money. They have no intention of bringing the book out. And then when the book finally came out, there was this wonderful, gratifying silence. It all stopped. And some of the people that were most critical of us gave us favorable reviews. It was a wonderful thing. I remember getting on the internet one night, very in the wee hours of the morning, just before going to bed, and got an email from Lamberto Bava, Mario's son, which was a photograph of their entire family standing around him holding the book. And it was a wonderful feeling of fulfillment to see that. And to hear him that he spent like a whole evening just paging through the book. And the sun came up without him realizing it. He was so engrossed in it.
Yeah, I was.
So
no, go ahead.
No, what I was going to say was the idea that you could actually repay something that meant so much to me, and give them something back. I wish that Mario himself could have seen it, but Lamberto actually gave me a photograph that in which he declares me an honorary member of their family. So that's like the best review I could possibly expect.
Well, I understand. I'm looking at that thing I got it out last night, knowing we were going to do this podcast today, and I just, all of a sudden it's like, an hour later, I was supposed to be going to bed. I was like, and I just couldn't put the book down because I hadn't looked through it recently. I was just like, it's just a beautiful book. Would you say Bava, because the book is such an amazing thing, that is that your number? I mean, I know this is terrible to ask because I don't like this question asked, but is Bava your main director, your biggest one, or is there?
It's weird, but no, not even close. But I spent 32 years researching his career.
Right. Okay.
He spoke to me in a very direct way, and people would ask me, why did you pick him as a subject? And I would say, I think he picked me. Rather than I picked him, because they just speak to me on a very personal level, like I understand them and I know how to describe them and get to the heart of them. And that's also been my relationship with Joe Sarno's movies, and I'm writing about Joe Sarno now. And it looks like that's going to become another huge thing. It's going to be 2 volumes. And he's not a particularly popular filmmaker, but I want to use my insights to hopefully bring more of an audience to him, because I think he did very important work.
Well, I'll be looking forward to that. That's for sure.
I'm looking for a publisher now.
Chris, I guess one of your favorites, I think we've talked about this, or what I think it is, because it's Leone. Sergio, I have to bring Sergio, but
it's okay, Ted. You can do it.
Well, I would have to say that Sergio Leone. There was a time when I was about 12 years old, 13, when I saw a lot of movies close together that really put me on the road to who I became. I mean, it was like finding the company that tell you who you are. We are your tribe, and especially when I went to see Once Upon a Time in the West. I mean, I didn't go to see Once Upon a Time in the West. I went to see the co-feature, which was an Elvis Presley Western called Charo. But they got the showing times mixed up. And so I had to sit through Once Upon a Time in the West to get to the Elvis movie. And I felt, I've said that I felt raped seeing the Leone film for the first time, because I just felt like this movie pushed me back in my chair and ripped my shirt open and had its way with me. Because I was never so engrossed or so traumatized and so completely swept away by a movie. And looking back, I think a lot of that had to do with its silences and its use of sound effects and the just the operatic quality of it. But anyway, when the movie ended, I actually thought about sitting there and seeing the Elvis movie, and I ended up getting up, putting my jacket on, and to this day, I've never seen Charo. And not only that, but I sort of made a pact with myself. I knew that Leone had made other movies. I knew that he made the Clint Eastwood Westerns.
Had you seen them?
No. And I didn't see them deliberately for another 10 years.
Wow.
I told myself I was just going to look at that movie whenever I could see it again for 10 years. At least, and I don't know that I made the pact with myself at that exact point, but it was over the period of time when it came to television, first on the ABC Sunday night movie. And it's just that the movie spoke to me so personally and so directly. I mean, Quentin Tarantino said that he had the same experience when he saw the movie for the first time. It made him want to be a filmmaker. And to me, it told me that I had to write about film. You know, I wish in retrospect that it had told me, you need to be a film director, but I wasn't that bright. So I just became the film critic. But it was huge. It was a huge event in my life seeing that movie because I didn't like Westerns. And
so that's why you didn't see the Eastwoods. You avoid.
Yeah, I put those off, you know. And when I finally got around to them, you know, I've done the audio commentaries.
Oh, yeah. I listened to them.
But, you know, and they're all wonderful in their own way, but they are not equal. I would say even the three of them are not equal to what he accomplished in Once Upon a Time in the West.
I guess, you know, I had the little luxury of seeing Sergio kind of grow in front of me, and you came full blown of the masterpiece. But I was so enamored of that, I convinced my 8th grade English teacher to do my term paper on Clint Eastwood. And I ended the thing going, I think he'll be a superstar one day. And I had a lady up the street make me a poncho for my 12-inch G.I. Joe, so that the G.I. Joe could be the man with no name. I thought
you were going to say that you wore it to school.
No, but I was looking for a poncho. There was an art store that had some hippie clothes in the corner they sold. Yeah. And I would every time we went there, I'd go in there looking for a poncho because I was determined to get little cigars and poncho and wear that because I was all the whole man with no name. And then when I finally got to see What's Upon the West, I was like, it was a whole different level. I mean, I remember I think my joke is one of my myths I like to talk about is when I saw Once Upon a Time in America in the theater, I knew I was seeing the butchered version, and I wept as I watched it, because knowing that we were not getting the full Sergio effect here in this film. Speaking of which, that's I guess how I first talked to you on the phone was when I called Donna about some Video Watchdog magazine stuff because I was helping out a comic book store. But I said, is Tim available to talk? And I got you on the phone because you had mentioned that James Woods talked about seeing the long version of Once Upon a Time in America or something like that. Yeah. And that's what you were gracious enough to let me rattle on and slobber as a fanboy on the phone with you on that first time.
No, I mean, I don't know what he saw, but I'd love to see a more complete version of the film.
Yeah,
it hasn't turned up yet.
They've been working on it. The latest version, they finally pulled a Blu-ray out. Has the what's her name? Nurse Ratched. What's her actress name? I can't think.
Louise Fletcher.
Yeah, the Louise Fletcher parts are back in it, but the quality's not that good. So.
Right.
Did you end up doing a commentary for all the Leone Westerns?
Just the 3 Eastwood Dollars movies.
Okay, but so I wanted to segue into talking about the commentary process. How many you've done over 100 by now? You say?
I just did 110.
I was trying to keep up, Tim. I don't know if I can.
I know.
Ted was saying he was trying to buy every one of them as they came out, but
yeah, I wish I could help, but you know, I've got to make money.
Well, so, I mean, how did the process start? Just you look at your writing, you might be an obvious person to...
Yeah, for a long time, the ones that I was doing were just the ones on Mario Bava. I think that people start out by typecasting you. You know, you start to do commentaries based on what are your known areas of expertise. But fortunately, after working on them for a while, I started working for Kino Lorber. And there's a fellow there named Brett Wood, who was a contributor to Video Watchdog, a longtime reader, and he knew that my range of film expertise was broader than just that. And so he encouraged me to do other commentaries, which I think started out from horror, but then branched out into other areas like European art films and such.
Well, you've done Compulsion with. I was really.
Yes.
That was an interesting one, I thought.
That's the process. They actually will submit a list to me when they have new acquisitions, and they'll say, "Let us know what you would like to do," and then we'll let you know which ones you can do.
They need to upgrade their Richard Lester titles and get you to do the commentaries on those.
Well, I might be able to do them. I mean, they're not what I would think of as. I don't think of myself as having a particular expertise about Richard Lester. I've seen the movies, but I have often doing a commentary is the excuse that I need to do a lot of study, and become better acquainted with something. That actually happens, more often than you might think. And I always think that a commentary is successful to me is if I learn something new from the process of having done it.
Do you have any personal favorite commentaries?
My favorites that I've done. Not just because of the way they turned out, but for the opportunity. I loved the box set of the Alain Robbe-Grillet films that I did for the BFI. That was doing commentaries for 5 very obscure and very challenging art films that I think had only been written about in academic journals before I did my commentaries. And I always, I hadn't seen all of the films before. I'd seen a couple of them, but they were all, engrossing. To me, and it was an extremely fulfilling thing to work on because Robbe-Grillet has always been one of my favorite novelists as well.
Well, I actually meant overall, not just your own, but anyone's favorite commentaries. Like Ted and I always talk about the Limey commentary, how much we love them.
Oh, the Catch-22 is.
Yes, Soderbergh's good commentaries. Actually,
other people's commentaries. I mean, actually, that would have been my first go-to choice, the Catch-22 commentary by Mike Nichols and Steven Soderbergh. I thought that was superb.
You've had a chance to do a Danger Diabolik. You did that with John Philip Law. Do you enjoy doing the commentaries where you get to bounce off someone, or do you? I know with Tim Lucas commentary, you get wall-to-wall pack. It's jammed full. There's no hardly any pause unless you make.
Well, it has a lot to do with the way I go at things. I mean, with the commentaries that I do now, I basically, it's always a bit like scoring a movie with music. You look where it should drop in and when it should drop out, when you should allow soundtrack in. And, so it's like it has a lot to do with time codes and then reading things to see how long it actually takes to read what I've written, and a certain amount of dramatic sense has to go into the way I read. The actual recording process is my least favorite, and now it's become my favorite part to edit the commentaries, and to be able to actually. A lot of people just turn over their raw track to the disc producer, but I'm doing my own production, editing on the commentaries now, and just leaving it to them to tweak things here and there if they want, or if there's a censorship problem.
So getting back to what you said about making it helps you study and get into it. So are you actually? I don't want to reveal super secrets here or anything, but sounds like maybe you once in a while will pick a film that you are not super knowledgeable about, but your confidence on that you will provide in the long run you will get to a very enjoyable commentary, but you're gonna have to do a lot more homework as opposed if Bava you could probably do it in your sleep. Well, I'm exaggerating there, but is that because I'm just thinking, not you know to tell us anything like that, but I was going to a point there. But anyway, so you do see it as a challenge every once in a while for yourself.
I do. I mean, I will pick out a thing like I mentioned Whirlpool earlier, which is like a 1970 Spanish/British co-production. And it was actually the first X-rated horror film in America. It came out in 1970 through Cinemation Industries, and I was always, I had a sort of longing feeling about seeing that movie because it had been forbidden to me at the time when it came out, and then it completely disappeared off the face of the earth for decades. So when it was offered to me, I said, yes, I'll definitely do it. But actually, when it came to the point of writing about it, there weren't a lot of sources where I could get any sort of meaningful information. I mean, a lot of the people that worked on the film did so under pseudonyms. It was made under sort of shady circumstances. So a lot of it had to come from me and just primal associations and observations of what was going on with the film and with its soundtrack. And it ends in a particularly brutal way that I really do think must have convinced Wes Craven of how to do Last House on the Left, because it just ends with a very brutal murder and then like cuts to black and you've got this romantic music on the soundtrack as exit music. I think that Last House on the Left actually had more to do with that film, so it came from the same distributor as it came from Virgin Spring. I really think the Virgin Spring idea came along later, maybe mid-production.
So when you make those connections and it's all on you, do you are you fearless? You just say, okay, I'm going to go for this because, there's always a chance somebody's going to, the director himself or the writer or whoever, going to come back and say, well, Tim, you're way off the mark. You put that aside. You don't even think about that.
No, I really think that I think that everybody has a valid point of view. And as long as they can put their point of view into language that, conveys its meaning and can attract people or turn other people off. I mean, all I can do is really put my own feelings into the best language, the best communicative language that I can, and then put it out there. And people seem to respond well to that. I just did one on a commentary on a movie, Joseph Strick's The Balcony, based on the Jean Genet play. And this movie stars Peter Falk and Shelley Winters. It's an art film, but it was made with big stars back in the 60s. This also has Leonard Nimoy just before he did his Star Trek pilot. So it's a very interesting movie from the standpoint of actors. Many of them were associated with leftist politics at the time, and they had been blacklisted. And so a lot of the people in the film were working together on that ground, obviously. But it was an attempt to make a sort of commercial art film because Joseph Strick, the director, thought that Americans should be making art films just like people in Europe were making art films, that in America we didn't have that discipline or that mode of expression. So I was able to construct that commentary mostly out of digging into newspaper archives and pulling out quotes and also responding to the film directly. And you can sort of see it as a premonition of movies like the Manchurian Candidate and especially Dr. Strangelove, where you get black comedies about politics and totalitarianism and fascist takeovers.
Well, how do you approach commentaries like something like Lost Highway or Last Year at Marymad? Like, how do you, something that's abstract, are you going to come up with a potential theory for what's happening in the movie? Are you informational? Are you reacting just to the movie as it comes along?
Yeah, basically the last thing. It's basically me reacting as they go along because my deadlines are tight and I don't have a lot of time to really deliberate too much about things. It's best to just plunge in with the feel and write about the first thing that comes to my mind when I look at something. As the script comes along, I may move things around for greater convenience, or it may become more important to say something different up front, for example. But yeah, so there's really like no one formula to go in, but a lot of it is just very instinctive, I have to say, and going with what I feel needs to be talked about during an individual scene. I started working on one a couple of days ago, and I've looked at the movie now a couple of times, and I've done some reading about it. And today I spent most of the day just cataloging the different song cues or music cues in the film and about where music is used. So I think music is going to become an important dimension of the commentary. And the more I do these, the more I really do want to get away from whenever an actor comes on screen cataloging their performances. I would much rather distill it to, a sort of little portrait, of why they are important as an actor on the basis of just a few performances than going into a whole catalog.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about being worried about just all of a sudden the commentary just becomes a walking, an oral IMBD. Because I like with the Leones, I wanted to hear Tim's artistic interpretation and takes, and all about the, as opposed, I could go to the book or IMBD to look up the actor, So
right.
I'm sure you have to put some of that in there for the people that don't go to the internet or books. I guess you got to put, it's a sort of a requirement.
Yeah. Well, it's also sort of a requirement if your running time is 2.5 to 3 hours.
Yeah, true. Okay.
You have some niches, to fill in.
That's true.
When you get to that.
Good point.
There's more commentaries in demand right now, even with streaming, right? Are you doing more?
Oh, sure.
Oh,
yeah, constantly. I've got, beyond the one that I'm doing now, I have like another 8 booked. So, and more will probably come after that. I hope they continue to come in. So like I say, they give me a list and I pick titles off the list, and then they sort of pick the ones that they want me to do from those that I've picked, while assigning others to other people, because they may have, other strengths in that area.
I worried because I found that I've been listening to a lot less commentaries lately, just because of I remember when Filmstruck came out, that was a reason I wasn't too big into it, and streamings don't seem to be offering it, but you have these movies being released with better transfers, and this gives you an opportunity to talk about different movies that way. So it's nice that at least one good thing is still thriving in the age of the streamers.
Oh yeah. Really the hard media, the actual discs are so important, because they're really taking the place now of what magazines have been for a long time. You've got the interviews with people, you've got the commentaries, you've got video essays. It's really the whole. I can remember when Cinefantastique used to be the only source of an on-set visit. And then Entertainment Tonight came along on television, and they took that same idea from Cinefantastique and would visit sets on television. So, and then Cinefantastique became dispensable, So you see these things come along, and really what magazines like Video Watchdog and other magazines were doing throughout the 90s and into the 2000s, it's all being expressed now through Blu-rays in the supplementary material. Like the wonderful things that Konstantin Nazar's been doing with the Universal archival releases, the classic horror from Universal releases from Shout Factory, and also their Hammer titles. He's been supervising both of those, Konstantin has, and he's been doing just superb work and getting people who are widely published on these subjects to chip in, and so they're really like crash courses they're very educational.
Is that the reason why Video Watchdog isn't a physical copy anymore? I mean, between that and the internet?
I think I think that all that had a lot to do with it. It's I think that more than most magazines, we had something timely built into our nature, because people want to read about what's wrong with releases before they spend their money on them. And so when people online started reporting things immediately, we might have had to wait 2, even 4 months before we could get information into print. And so even it's like the authority that you bring to the job really doesn't have anything to do with it in a fight with immediacy. People really want some immediate thing, an immediate answer to their question. And at the same time, their requirements of what they need from their information diminish. Because they just want quick bursts of information. They don't want to have to read a full essay. And in Video Watchdog, we would have no limit requirements placed on our essays. If someone wanted to fill an entire issue with a story, we would consider that. Some of our pieces were quite lengthy.
I want to real briefly go back into the screenwriting. So, how many more scripts have you written after the Naked Lunch thing? Like, I got Man with the Kaleidoscopic Eyes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Man with Kaleidoscope Eyes is the big one. That one is still under option by Joe Dante and Spectre Vision. And they're supposedly lining up cast for it. They basically have to still find the guy to play Roger Corman, and they've always been trying to find that guy as the first component and then build a supporting cast around him, but that hasn't been working. So they're now trying to create an all-star supporting cast and attract the key player.
I heard Bill Hader on a podcast talk about doing a read-through with this.
Yeah. I mean, back in October of, I think, 2016, there was a live table read at the Vista Theater of the script, which was promoted as the greatest film never made. And it was a huge evening, apparently. They had, in the audience, there was Peter Bogdanovich and Jonathan Demme, who, before he passed away. Roger Corman was there and actually took part in the reading. Bill Hader played Corman as the main character in the story. And Joe Dante did the narration on the stage. And they got a standing ovation. And they filled up the theater, turned 300 people away. It was a hugely successful evening, and we thought things would go fast after that, but they haven't.
That's entertainment.
Yeah, it's entertainment, yeah. So actually, it's taken so long to try to get this thing off the ground that I wrote it as a novel, and I'm trying to find a publisher for the novel now. Also, it sort of discouraged me in terms of writing more screenplays. Everybody's been telling me all through these years that what you really need to have is a bunch of unproduced scripts in store, because when your picture gets made, people are going to want to read your other scripts.
All this stuff on spec.
Yeah, but it's, I wrote one that was actually fairly similar to Man with Kaleidoscope Eyes, called Me and the Orgone, which was based on Orson Bean's book about his experiences with Reiki and therapy. And I read this when I was a teenager, and then after I finished the Bava book, I read it again, and I realized, that it really could be told as a romantic comedy. And so I got Orson's permission to adapt it and wrote it, showed it to a few people, got very enthusiastic responses to it, and nothing, So I remember Orson warning me about this. He said, I don't think you're going to have a chance of getting this thing produced. He says he loved the script, but he said, I don't see this getting made. But he said, I didn't see becoming, the John Malkovich movie. What was it called?
Being John Malkovich.
Being John Malkovich. He was in that. And he said, I didn't think that was going to get made either. So what do I know? But Joe Dante told me that he thought that it was a better script than what we had with Me and the Man with Kaleidoscope Eyes at the time. That's gone through further drafts since then. And now Orson passed away about a month ago, and so I really don't know where that stands. I mean, I may end up having to it's based on a book. I may end up having to adapt that screenplay into a novel. In order to get it out there, or maybe just publish the script. I mean, Orson gave me permission to do whatever I needed to do to get the thing out there. So it's kind of a heartbreaking business, and I would much rather do something that I knew would get exposed, get a readership, get an audience.
Well, Shane's experiencing that somewhat. They're getting the working. As a film editor here, he's always going from one job to another.
Yeah.
You know how it goes, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and also I find from what know of people's lives when they're like working in this business all the time, trying to get new work, it's, Orson Welles said it's no way to live, and he said that toward the end of his life, and I'm closer to the end of my life now than I am to the beginning, and so it's really not a lifestyle that attracts me anymore. I'm happy. I'm perfectly happy living the way I am.
I think we should probably start to wind down, but I wanted to ask lastly about the new Beverly Blog. I love the stuff you guys are writing on the new Beverly Blog.
Oh, well, I mean, I love working for them. They're very prompt with their payment, and they always want me to come to them with ideas. But I do love what they're doing, and I love writing for them.
I'm just astounded by Quentin's writings. I start laughing out loud because I love the way he'll just go off on tangents. It's on one subject, but then all of a sudden he'll single on Charles Bronson, and then also he's over here, and then he'll bring it back. But it's just so wonderful. Everybody has their own style. And,
I love his enthusiasm. I know he got really fired up about Ralph Meeker for a while, and so I've been paying special attention to Ralph Meeker when he pops up in things.
Yeah, apparently Leo DiCaprio was entranced by Ralph Meeker too. He came back, who's this Ralph Meeker? And Quentin was more than happy to go on about him.
Yeah,
I could sit here all night and talk to Tim, but I'm sure he's got a commentary to record or a book to write. So,
yeah, we may end up having to do Wonderfest this way this year.
Yeah, sure. I'll bring Shane can bring their equipment or something. Yeah. So, but yeah, Wonderfest is it's a wonderful thing. And I think when I first met you, it was Joe Dante that was there that weekend, and I approached you and said you were one of my favorite writers. I compared you to a couple other ones. I said, and I compared you. I said you were better. I thought I enjoyed yours better than this other one. And the first thing you said, well, that's a good writer. I like him too. You're very gracious. No, I think what I would love to talk more about, but this would just we touched upon it some, but adjusting your eyes, your critical eyes to watching a Sarno film or a Milligan film or a Franco film or a Bava film. I have a bad habit, like I said before, or maybe I told this to Shane earlier, that I like to read about this stuff. Or the Rodney and Troy doing the Paul Naschy cast, Paul Naschy. People would say, look at these films and go, this is bad filmmaking. This is not good, or this is weird, or I don't understand this, or and to see the critical eye that you guys bring to these directors and their films is so astounding to me and intrigues me, because I think Martin Scorsese once said how American film fans we grow up with a Hollywood style of filmmaking. And the camera's invisible, the editing's invisible, everything's invisible, and everything wraps up. And so part of it, and then, you have the Godard, the Antonionis, the Fellinis, everybody, so okay, they put them on the pantheon. But what about these guys, the Sarno and the Milligans and the Bavas? And why aren't they known more, or are they supposed to stay in their corner? Or, that's what I think is just intriguing about what you see and how you approach these things, and how they speak to you at some point.
Well, really, the thing that got me into Mario Bava in the first place is because I knew from the little bit that I'd seen of his films that they all struck me as being extremely well made. But then I would read reviews in Leonard Maltin's movies on TV Book, and they would always be bombs, So
what do you think that? Why that disconnect there?
No, I think it was just an automatic bias against a certain kind of film. If it didn't have stars, they would see that as like a mark against it. If it was dubbed, certainly that would be a mark against it. But, especially with if you look at the more I look at Jean-Luc Godard's films, the more I can see his influence on Franco. And Franco will say that Godard was one of his favorite directors of that time. So there's a very definite connection there, an aesthetic connection. And what really drew me to Bava was that I saw the same character in his movie Kill Baby Kill that appeared in Fellini's movie Toby Dammit, the episode in Spirits of the Dead. And the Fellini film got extraordinary reviews, and the Bava film was cast off as a bomb. I mean, the reviewers may have just looked at the title and assumed it was a bomb and didn't go to the screening or whatever. But I thought, well, what is the difference here? What am I not seeing? And what I wasn't seeing is the pretentiousness that other critics were bringing to the task of reviewing films. That it was a very it was like almost like levels of society.
It's weird how groupthink just takes over for some critics.
Yeah. And in the course of my research, I found out that Bava and Fellini were great friends, and that at one point they actually had offices that were just down the hall from one another, and they would send messages to each other on a little convertible truck. And the guy that wrote the screenplay for Toby Dammit published a magazine, a sort of literary magazine in Italy called Il Delatore, and before they published when they published their last issue, they said their next issue was going to be a special issue devoted to the films of Mario Bava. This would have been the first time Bava's work had ever been covered in any kind of serious detail, but they ceased publication before it could happen. So, I found out from that this fellow, Bernardino Zapponi was his name, had been a fan of Bava's, and he brought that information to the Fellini film when he wrote the script for it. And oddly enough, Fellini had read a novel of his, Zapponi's, and thought that he was a kindred spirit and wanted him to write this thing with him. And when he looked up his telephone number, he found out that he lived in an apartment directly across the street from his office. So it was kismet. They had to work together. So I love finding these little connections that exist between people and that pull each other. And my relationship to Bava and his relationship to Fellini and my relationship to Fellini, it's all, it's a weird little galaxy.
Well,
and
people forget. I keep like with Tarantino that his company name is A Band Apart, taken from a Godard film. Yeah. I think, in fact, I just watched for the first time. I'm embarrassed to say it for the first time, but I watched. What did I watch? I watched Band Apart. And I'm sitting there watching this, with all the Tarantino behind me and all this other stuff behind, and I'm saying this is like a fan film by Godard, but it's on a more intellectual level. But it's like there's tons of Easter eggs. It's like all these things that he loves. That it's almost like I could see this is a Tarantino film, but it's made over in France by Godard. In a way, but it's done. The intellectuals grabbed Godard and took them from themselves. I guess maybe I don't know. But I'm I can't articulate as well as you can, Tim. That's why we talked to you. But it was just I was amazed how I was sitting there going, I'm enjoying this film, thinking it's going to be Godard. I'm going to have to do it was a total opposite, and I think I see what Quentin sees in him that I didn't realize till now. It took me a while to get into that. And the mixture is just amazing, with Quentin's films and the mixture, that high and brow, low brow, middle brow. I don't even like to say those terms. To me, it's just all one big, wonderful world of cinema. But
the great thing about Quentin's films is that they give the audience credit for being film literate, which is something that so many other productions don't. They will, if you try to get a reference, into a film, they'll say people will never get that, in the Midwest. And I said, well, I live in the Midwest and I wrote that, people just don't know. They think that because they're in Los Angeles, they know more about the film business. But Entertainment Tonight's been on the air since the 70s. People are immersed in the film business and in film literacy if they follow any kind of broadcast movies, streaming movies. People know a lot more than they're giving credit for, and he puts it all into the movies. So like in doing, it's like Inglourious Bastards, for example. It's a war picture, but he samples music from spaghetti westerns and from a Pontecorvo movie and
Cat People.
The Cat People. And it's all there to sort of be sorted out and appreciated. And the more that you recognize and appreciate, the better you like those movies. Unless you're one of those people who thinks, oh, he's stealing all this, because they recognized it. They think he's stealing all this. No, he's making use of it, which is just what Franco did with good art.
Well, yeah, and I love the book and the Christopher Frayling's Sergio Leone's biography. He says Sergio was at a festival and he sees Bud Bedecker, and he's running after Bud. He goes, Bud, I love you. I stole everything from you. And sure enough, when I started watching the Bedecker films, I'm like, oh my gosh, I see where Sergio's getting this stuff. But then Sergio took it to a whole different stratosphere.
Yeah, it's like when Fellini and Ken Russell met. They said, oh, the British Fellini, the Italian Ken Russell, and embraced.
I love those stories. When I got to meet John Borman one time, and I remember when I was watching Point Blank, and the footsteps going, the footsteps that Lee Marvin's walking in there.
The LAX thing.
Yeah, and I remember seeing that. I'm like, wait a minute. That's kind of like the phone ringing in Once Upon a Time in America. And sure enough, when I talked to John, he says, yeah, I was talking to Sergio. And Sergio goes, yeah, I stole that from you, John. So I was like, oh my gosh, I was actually able to pick something like that and figure it out. So
I did want to ask you about the Nick Cave inspired novella you mentioned.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's an interesting story because it's ongoing, and it's something that's just outgrown its original conception. I was originally approached by a couple of guys, I think they were in the UK, asking me if I would consider writing a short story for an anthology that they wanted to do based on Nick Cave songs, inspired by Nick Cave songs. So I picked a couple of songs and came back to them, and they said, oh, no, those are already taken. And anything I came up with, that's already been taken. So then I found that he had done a CD release that was a lecture called, I think, The Secret Life of the Love Song. And because his title's slightly different than mine. And what it was a lecture about the history of love songs, the nature of love songs, and the different kinds of love songs that exist. And he illustrated his points in the lecture by performing 5 different songs. And so I thought, well, this structure appeals to me. So what I will do, and they said, yeah, you can do that. It encompassed 5 of his individual songs. Most of them were from The Boatman's Call. So what I wrote was from the standpoint of a lecturer standing in front of an audience and performing songs that he wrote himself, and then talking about them and weaving stories out of these songs. So what I did for the songs was I wrote lyrics to take the place. So it was like poetry, interrupting prose. And the prose, goes into some philosophical abstractions and digressions. But you always come back to a new kind of song. And what happened is that after I had signed a deal with PS Publishing to do the book, finally, this is like almost 10 years after I had written the original draft that PS Publishing said that they would publish it. A friend of mine from Facebook, her name is Dorothy Moskowitz-Filarski. She had formerly been the lead vocalist in a 1960s group called the United States of America. They recorded for Columbia one of my favorite psychedelia albums. It was like an early electronica psychedelia album. And they only made 1 record, but it's enough. I mean, it's just a classic. And she's one of my favorite vocalists of all time. And we became friends on Facebook. And I don't remember exactly how she came to read the manuscript. I think she just asked. She was curious about my creative writing. And she said, these songs, do you have music that exists for these? And I said, no, I have a rough idea of how they would go, but, not really. There's no recordings or anything. And she said, well, would you be interested in letting me try my hand at writing music for them? And so we began to collaborate. And she would help me to fine-tune the lyrics to make them easier to sing. And so she had definitely a great role to play in fine-tuning my lyrics and bringing music to them. And so we've been swapping things back and forth through email, recordings that she does at home. She's got a microphone like I do, and sometimes I would just like give her a vocal impression of how I imagined the thing sounding. And then she would send me back some beautifully fully formed thing. And so she's been doing her recordings in GarageBand. And she befriended another Facebook friend of mine, the guitarist Gary Lucas from Captain Beefheart's Magic Band and Gods and Monsters, and he played with Jeff Buckley on the Grace album. And he said, "Would you like some guitar?" And we said, "Yes, absolutely." And so Gary added guitar to a couple of the tracks.
Somebody's going to have to come up and go, "You need some cowbell."
You need some cowbell. So anyway, there's 5 songs in all. So it'll be something like a soundtrack EP. And we've also got Mike Fornatale, who's been a vocalist and guitarist with reformed versions of The Left Bank and Moby Grape over the years. He is, I think, a Boston-based musician. So he actually worked with me. He's one of these all-man band musicians. He can actually take a vocal from me and build up an entire band behind it. So on one of the tracks, I'm using a pseudonym on the track, but I do sing one of the tracks. I'm not much of a vocalist, but on this one, I don't need to be.
You had trouble putting your name on it?
Yeah, it didn't seem quite right. I write too many things anyway. I should use a pseudonym now and then. But yeah, that's actually in the form of a like a sort of 1940s crooner song. Okay. And then there's another one that's like very psychedelic, and then there's one that's very brooding, like a ballad. And then there's also one that's very soaring and romantic, and I think commercial. If somebody like Adele were to perform this song, I think it could be a huge hit. So in fact, when Dorothy put the music to that one, it's called Trust in Love. And when I heard what she did with it, I thought, we need to do something to make this weirder, don't we? And she said, well, we can talk about that at some point, but you'd be surprised, the power that this has just on its own. And I think she's right. Just a straightforward presentation, I think, is going to be the best note to end on with this book. So I still haven't talked yet to PS Publishing about what the final shape of this thing is going to be. I would really like to be able to include a CD, at least in the first certain number of books, maybe the first 100 or 200, and then have everybody else, get it from streaming, because we'll be able to stream these songs as well, and people seem to prefer to stream rather than buy.
Of course, if you do put it out now, you're gonna have to probably do a vinyl version, because that's the multicolor vinyl.
Yeah, well, if somebody wants to undertake the cost of such a venture, I mean, just going into all this excess with record production and all this stuff has been taking me in new directions that, I really don't want to spend my life pursuing that. Somebody once told me very wisely, if you love music, don't make it a hobby. Just keep it as a hobby, because when it becomes business, it takes some of the joy out of it.
I'm finding that for filmmaking in general. Like I'm trying to find a way of separating my day job and my hobby. Just because it's just the stress that comes around it when you're hustling for work. Just the work you take. You have to detach yourself after a certain point.
Yeah, but there's nothing like finally hearing fully formed what you've been able to create this way. It's in a whole new venue for me.
Is this your first musical venture?
Yeah. I mean, I've done other things, but they've never come out. And it's amazing to me that the raw material attracted collaborators of this caliber, they're friends, but these are important musicians, and they're willing to participate. And so I'm just overjoyed at the authenticity that they're going to bring to the expression of this project. It's much more than it was on its own.
Let's go way back. I have another question for you, Tim, because I don't think we talk about this much. Is you were right there, a pretty big comic book collector, reader, but you didn't stay with it. You kind of at some point, did you do the typical, I go to Mad, National Lampoon, Ramparts, or you just totally thought, nah, comic books are not for me anymore, even though later you do the throat sprockets and stuff. But it was was that an art form that you didn't want to keep up with, or it just outgrew it, or it's just...
I'll tell you, around the time when I sort of had to stop collecting comics because I left home and I basically had to leave my collection behind me, so I lost everything that I had by moving out. It happened to coincide at a time when Marvel, which was my favorite company, was going through some terrible changes. I remember that they were bringing in, they I think lost Jack Kirby, they'd lost Ditko. They had John Buscema, but suddenly there was Sal Buscema coming in and drawing like John. And the stories, Stan Lee was no longer working on the stories, and you get people like Roy Thomas and Jerry
Conway.
Jerry Conway. Yeah. And they had their good issues, but they also, went in some odd directions. And I remember, I was the most devout Spider-Man reader, and then issue 100 came along, and at the end of the story, he discovered that he had 8 legs, 8 arms. And I thought, okay, I can believe a man walking up the side of a building, but I can't buy this, and I just stopped buying Spider-Man for a while, and then happened to just come back to it before Gwen Stacy was killed, which was a huge traumatic thing. And the first time that I'd seen comic books really employed, to get at a reader's emotions on that level. So it was a time when they were taking some big chances, but it just wasn't the golden age of Marvel anymore. And I had never particularly liked DC, although I liked some of the quirky stuff that Ditko did when he went over there, like the Creeper and the Hawk and the Dove. And I loved the Thunder Agents from Charlton, and I loved Herbie, the Ogden Whitney book. So it's like when my interest started turning toward, adult fiction, literary fiction, I sort of left comic books behind for a while. And when I started writing comics on my own for Steve Bissette, I, did a lot of sort of, reconnoitering, looking around, seeing what other people were doing. And Steve let me see some of Alan Moore's scripts so that I could just get the format, to write in. We laugh now when we think of all the people whose work he could have shown me as a format,
Wow. Yeah.
That's where I got the idea to turn in 32-page scripts and expect an artist to just swallow it,
So there were things happening. I mean, you had left it. I mean, I understood. I see your perspective. Kirby had left, and Ditko was gone, and Stan eventually goes out to Hollywood. So but there was things happening in the Bronze Age and onward. But as an art form, where do you stand? And of course, we got this, Martin Scorsese saying that the comic book movies are not cinema. I mean, the 8-year-old Teddy Haycraft, his mind is blown to see these things come to life so vividly. But I was telling Shane and some of my friends how the last couple ones I've seen, I'm getting fatigued by it. The fatigue is kicking in a little bit.
See, for me, I don't really get a kick out of seeing these drawings become real, through CG. no matter how good they are, they'll never be Jack Kirby drawings. They'll never be Steve Ditko drawings.
Good point.
And in trying to become more three-dimensional, more real, they lose the personality of the art that drew me to the comics in the first place. And the comics are also, I mean, the movies are far more dense than the comics ever were. And what I especially resent is that all of the superheroes they groom become the pet dogs of S.H.I.E.L.D. So it's like, don't even think of, being independent of the government. The government has got your ass. And you are our pet. You are not a vigilante. You are not a free agent. And that was the whole joy of the comic book, for people to have another identity where they didn't have to answer to authority figures. So the movies,
No,
I'm disenchanted with the movies because, I remember liking the first couple of Sam Raimi Spider-Man films. But all of these later ones, there are several that I haven't even bothered to look at. I haven't seen Captain Marvel. I haven't seen the last two Avengers movies. They just don't attract me.
No, Shane and I, we've had some interesting discussions with a professor from a campus.
Oh, we've had so many, and then he brought up the military-industrial complex thing. I had a guest on last episode who's Jacob Johnston, who turns out to be from Evansville, and he worked at Marvel, and he was telling me, we started talking about the scene in the first Raimi Spider-Man where you just have two masks talking to each other, and this is a thing that's for 2D. This is not something that's supposed to have motion behind it.
And all of the heroes have to pose without their masks on because, the actors want their faces to be seen. They don't want to subsume themselves in character. I mean, they're not Lon Chaney. If Lon Chaney was still acting today, he would say, of course I want to subsume myself into character. I don't want you to know it's me. But now everybody has to have their movie star close-up.
Yeah, they're paying the big bucks, and they want the mask off. I just, it's amazing to see this stuff. But I've also, the part of me is that I always use this phrase with my friends, the tyranny of nostalgia. I keep on, the part of me, is like, I'm a 61-year-old man, and why do I want to see guys in pajamas beating each other up? But there's some of that, it's the artwork that's still on my shelf. I have 2-3 shelves full of Jack Kirby artwork, and I still go to it. I still look at it. So I'm just marveled, amazed by this guy. Or Steve Ditko,
and a lot of it is just people punching each other out in different ways. I mean, it's very dynamic, but I mean, just graphically, it's so fulfilling. It's so pleasing to look at.
Plus, the narratives about people punching each other, and that this solves a problem somehow. It's just,
yeah.
This is a broader question, but this probably is a good last question to ask. It's a broad one though. What do you think is the state of film criticism right now?
Oh, yeah.
Versus, publishing stuff online, people making stuff on YouTube. One of the constant themes of this show is that movies, I worry that they just don't mean as much to people anymore. They're not water cooler stuff. It's not. We can't go back to the 70s. So I would just wonder, what do you think that means for film criticism?
I honestly don't know because people aren't really reading. They don't have the same relationship to criticism as readers that have always been around before, where you would sit in a chair and you would read something in depth. When people go to look up something on the internet, they might find an essay that they want to read. But I know from looking at my own blog page stats that people that stop to read something will glance over it. They won't take time to read every detail because the internet impels people to keep moving, move on. Find something more interesting if you can, before people will actually settle on something and spend time absorbing it. So I think there's a more superficial response, and that leads to people expressing themselves in bullets rather than in points that, are taken time to be, carefully, meticulously structured and expressed, So I find that even from when my wife asks me to explain things like from news stories that I've picked up, I find that my own understanding of the stories is largely constructed from headlines and first lines of articles, and don't really, mesh together into real sense. I've got a sense of a sense, but I can't really discuss these things in close detail, serious detail. And I think that may come through in a way that people are absorbing criticism now, that people are seeing, I don't know how many people really listen to audio commentaries, although they seem to be doing their part in keeping Blu-ray and DVD discs in print. I think that if it wasn't for the supplementary material on these discs, that they would be having a harder time competing with streaming outlets, because people are always about convenience, and these items also take room to store, especially for collectors who have been collecting them for decades. So streaming becomes more attractive just as a sense of this won't occupy any space. It's an attractive facet, but I don't know. Honestly, since I stopped publishing Video Watchdog, I haven't read a lot of film criticism. I get a couple of the major film magazines, but I really just glance through them. It's rare that I will actually read something from beginning to end. So I think the internet has sort of trained me to have a certain disregard for that kind of information. What really interests me as a critic is what I'm doing myself and what I'm learning myself. So it all has to do with a one-on-one relationship to me and the movie and the facts surrounding it.
Well, I think that's a good place to stop. So, Tim Lucas, I wanted to thank you for being on the podcast.
Sure. Thank you very much, Shane.
Thanks, Tim. I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
Ted, take care.
Yeah, tell Donna I said hi, please.
Great meeting you guys.
Okay, thanks.